Shiki was a depressed loser who got shipped to his hometown as punishment for being socially awkward. However, this turned out to be the best thing that happened to him, since he was able to rizz up some baddies that spiced up his life. It was winter, and there was a lot of snow when Shiki arrived in the city. He got a text from his dad literally saying his job was more important than him, but he was already aware of this, so he asked the cab driver to stop halfway to his house. Once he got out of the car, he admired the open space that was so clear thanks to all the snow, but when he tried to breathe in deeply, he saw the afterlife briefly as he almost froze his lungs. It was then he realized how cold Hokkaido was, which meant that he'd have to walk all the way into town in that weather. As he walked around while regretting his life choices, he took out his phone to check his house address, only to put it away since his battery could die at any second. He then noticed a yellow-haired girl who he profiled as a gyru, since she was showing her thighs despite the cold. Plus, she didn't bother with layers to cover herself, as fashion was obviously more important than staying warm.
Women.
She soon noticed him gawking at her like a typical nosy neighbor, so he decided to just ask her for directions. As she checked his phone, he noticed her nose and eyes were so red, but she interrupted his virgin thoughts by pointing at the direction he was heading. He immediately left since he was about to cream himself.
Huh?
But she stopped the idiot and revealed it would take him 3 hours to get home. It turned out he stopped in a super large town before his hometown, and to make matters worse, taxis don't pass through the area. She added that it would take at least 30 minutes to book a ride, which got him discouraged, until she suggested he waits for the bus with her. He thanked her for preventing him from freezing to death, which made her ask where he was from, to which he replied that he recently moved from Tokyo. She screamed once she heard him mention Tokyo, and when he said he moved because of his family, she said Tokyo was way better than her midtown, with no McDonald's. She thought he'd look down on her as a city boy, but he told her he loved the modest environment, when in reality he was a bullied loser in Tokyo. She then asked how old he was, and he said he was 16, so she jumped on him, claiming to be the same age. Her eyes brightened up further when she learned they'd be attending the same school, and before he knew it, she was all over him, making him freak out as she tingled his virgin hormones. Seeing his reaction, she said it was cold, and the simp agreed with her, staring at her warm plots. She told him to act casual with her, but then she started sneezing, which got him worried. However, when he noticed her toying with her snort like a waterbender, he was thrown off, but managed to compose himself before handing her a tissue. As time went by, our man was glad he finally talked to a hot girl and wondered if Hokkaido girls were unable to sense his loser energy. She suddenly dipped some ice in his shirt, causing him to dance like someone on imported crack, but at least his buffoonery made her laugh. Seeing her happy face got him mesmerized that he unconsciously said she was pretty. However, she punched him, saying it was uncool, even though she was glowing brighter than the red stoplight. The bus soon arrived, and as she was about to go, he asked for her name, so she told him it was Fuyuki. She bid him farewell before the bus went, leaving him so excited that it was when his dad texted him that he realized he forgot to take the bus.
Stupid!
The following day in school, Shiki introduced himself to the class as a transfer student, and while everyone welcomed him, a girl was engrossed in her phone. Once he sat down, he realized Fuyuki wasn't in his class and was a little disappointed. However, he wasn't able to get her out of his mind. Just then, Fuyuki came in through the back door, and when he noticed her, she jumped on him, excitedly saying she was glad he was sitting next to her. He was more confused by her free-spirited character, and when she casually called him by his first name, Shiki tried to hold himself from freaking out. As the class went by, Shiki was shivering like a shaved cat, and that was when he noticed most students were properly covered with blankets. Seeing him suffer, Fuyuki handed him one of the blankets she was using, which he then placed on his lap, causing the warm feeling to transport him to a heavenly realm as his degenerate thoughts began to imagine her under him. When he returned the blanket to her after class, she smelled it right in front of him, so he apologized if it stank, but she said it smelled like they smooched.
What?
As thanks for lending him a blanket, she made him walk her home and was acting tighter than a clingy girlfriend. As they walked, she asked if he had a girlfriend, and of course he denied it. She also asked for ideal date locations in Tokyo, which he listed. However, she asked about Shibuya, so he explained that it's more of a shopping district. He then asked about the town. However, she explained that it's usually too cold, so they hang out indoors rather than go out. This got him thinking that she was about to invite him over, but he quickly shook the thought off. They soon got to the station, so he bid her farewell. But before he could leave, she invited him to her place the following day.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
This got him glitching terribly as he wondered if he was turning into a harem protagonist. However, her cute face couldn't let him refuse her invitation. The following day, he arrived at her house and rang the doorbell while expecting the best from his daring adventure. She told him to come inside since the door was open. Once he got inside, she welcomed him and revealed that they were lucky since her parents weren't home. She led him into the living room, which was pretty warm thanks to a giant grill she called a heater. As he relaxed, thinking nothing could possibly happen in the sitting room, she teased him with her feet, which made him scream like a horse rider. She then took a seductive pose and asked what they could do to pass time. But since he didn't respond, she decided to get them drinks, and the idiot just accepted whatever she gave him. As she went back to the fridge, she suddenly screamed and revealed she spilled her drinks on her plot, a sight that had him spitting out his drink. She then left saying she had to change her clothes while he tried hard to calm his pounding heart. Unfortunately, the evil babe soon returned wearing only her underwear, so he had to distract himself by bringing out a movie for them to watch. However, that was also a bad idea as she had her bare rice cakes making eye contact with him, so he had to close his eyes. To make matters worse, the movie had a rated scene that was so awkward that he was uncomfortably stiff. He started hearing weird sounds from her and thought she was in the groove, but when she touched him, he realized she was fast asleep. Seeing her so carefree made him assume she probably already pro-zoned his sorry ass, so he decided to act the part by covering her. When she woke up, Age handed him back the jacket he covered her with before he left. As he walked home, she chased after him in her light dress and apologized for sleeping off, but Shiki quickly wrapped his scarf around her so she wouldn't catch a cold. To make it up to him, she then invited him to get lunch together. One day, Fuyuki had just finished satisfying her snowman fetish and was walking in school as she noticed Shiki, so she suddenly whispered into his ears, causing him to freak out. She noticed he was staring at a poster of the Winter Festival, so she asked if he was interested, to which he responded that he'd like to check it out over the weekend. On hearing this, she acted like he was asking her on a date and agreed to accompany him, much to the clueless noob's surprise. At Fuyuki's house, her mom served them mochi that was super sweet. When things settled down, her mom suggested Fuyuki and Momo accompany her for the weekend. However, Fuyuki said she was going on a date at the other end. Shiki got a text from her asking to meet at the train station by 11 a.m. the following day. The message got him all flustered as he tried to convince himself if he was now a Rizzler or she was simply using him. To confuse his virgin brain further, she sent him a pic of herself and the snowman she took earlier that day, a sight that reduced his life point from 7,000 to 4,000, but he managed to take it back up by cleansing himself from any sos thought. The day came as she actually wore an absurd outfit that drained his life points to the point of nosebleed. It turned out he could also be turned on by her covered body, and she didn't give him time to catch his breath as she continued to tease him. He then began rambling on about the side attractions for the event, but she warned him not to get his hopes up. They soon arrived at the venue, which had all sorts of ice sculptures, kids having fun, and this got him all excited. When they got to the ice sculpture segment, she grabbed his arm and forced him to pose for a pic, but our guy was getting hypnotized by her perfume. Even though the picture turned out horrible, he decided to keep it, much to his displeasure. Next, he went to a food stall where he ordered a corn dog coated with sugar. When she saw it, she begged to take a bite before opening wide for him to feed her, so he had no choice but to do so. However, he couldn't stop himself from staring at the snack. The next week in school, she forced him to eat lunch together, but he was shocked. She brought a special type of ramen. She even brought some for him since he was engrossed with the local dishes during the festival. She then proceeded to make the noodles and even explained the trick she used to get it ready in 3 minutes. She went ahead to feed him by mouth without asking and said she was returning the favor during the festival. When she asked what was in his bento, he said it was completely normal and proceeded to unveil a masterpiece that was so bewildering she had to take pictures of it. After eating, he thanked her for allowing him to experience the taste of eating cup ramen, as he went on about how he'd been doing new stuff with her. This got her shocked as he revealed he had never gone to a friend's house, eaten cup noodles, or shopped at a convenience store before. She then asked if he was one of those rich, spoiled kids, but he ruined her fantasies by saying he was an average kid. To confirm, she suggested she accompany him home, and of course he couldn't say no. On their way home, She bent over at a snow fort, causing him to turn around to avoid looking at her magic portal. She then grabbed his arm and dragged him in with her, so that he was on top of her in the tight space. She soon started making happy noises and asking if it was his first time. But at that time, Man was hearing someone else's voice, so it came out to see his grandma visibly disgusted by whatever she concluded he was doing. As he racked his head for an appropriate excuse, Fuyuki showed up and grabbed his arm, saying he should have enjoyed his first time even more. The young grandma wore a face of shock, but Fuyuki didn't care as she introduced herself, even adding that she ate the delicious bento she made for Shiki. When she asked what their relationship was, Shiki screamed that they were just classmates. However, Fuyuki seemed disappointed at the spineless virgin. The grandma then said she and Shiki had an appointment, so she told him to follow her, and he couldn't talk back as he left Fuyuki behind. It turned out his grandma didn't like people who were open in relationships. However, Fuyuki didn't take a cue and caught up with them. She said it was dangerous to use an umbrella when it snowed because her grandma fell down one time and had no free hand to support herself. As grandma closed the umbrella, Fuyuki asked what direction their house was, and when they pointed forward, she said the crossword was slippery and volunteered to show them a better route while also taking the old woman's bag. She then handed the bag to Shiki while pouting like an angry girlfriend, so he had to whisper that he considered her a very important friend. When they arrived at his house, she was visibly stunned since he actually lived in a mansion, so she wanted to leave early, but his grandma told her to stay for tea. While she brought the tea, she walked into Fuyuki acting like she owned the place, and when she overheard her saying she knew they were rich, she vowed to watch Fuyuki closely. She also noticed how Shiki smiled like when he was a kid, so she stopped herself from ruining whatever they had going on. The following day, Fuyuki was pumped about their full-day skiing class, while Shiki confessed that he was actually scared, so he had to pet his head like a kid just to tease him. She even promised to seduce him with her eye-popping shredding gnat, although the poor guy had no idea what was going on. As they talked, she noticed Sayuri sitting beside Shiki and asked if she was excited for the trip, but was totally aired, so she ended up answering her question by herself. On noticing that Fuyuki didn't get along with Sayuri, he assumed something must have happened between them in the past, but when he inquired from her, she just said she wanted to be friends with Sayuri but had not succeeded yet. She complained she was always treated like an NPC anytime she approached Sayuri, so Shiki had to ask why she was so determined to befriend her. This made the fangirl begin to analyze Sayuri like an obsessed idol stan, and even had Shiki captivated by her in no time. Seeing him stare at her like a lost puppy made Fuyuki pissed, so she stopped talking to him for a while. They soon arrived at the location, and after giving instructions to everyone, the teacher approached him since he was new. He asked if he'd be okay, but just to be safe, he handed Shiki over to the purple-haired Gyaru, since she was almost as useless as he was when it came to skiing. When it was just two of them alone, he went close to her to hold a conversation, only for her to put on her earbuds before he started yapping. But dude ignored the disrespect and went on to admire her hairstyle. She soon began to move by shifting her weight as she walked, and he was watching her closely so he could copy her. But she fell down in front of him. While he watched Sayuri struggle miserably, Fuyuki came flying like a professional, and when she circled around to meet them, Shiki said she looked awesome. However, the teacher scolded her for showing off, so she quickly left his radar to avoid being seen. Sayuri then asked Shiki if he was dating Fuyuki, but he denied it and said she was simply teasing him on the bus. Still, Sayuri seemed to think there was something more to their relationship. She then proceeded to brand Fuyuki as the popular rainbow girl that everyone adores, which left her to be the gloom queen. Meanwhile, Fuyuki met a kid at the expert course, but instead of taking him away, she volunteered to escort him down the dangerous part that might make him a vegetable with one wrong move.
Damn!
At the other end, the teacher who ditched their useless apologized for neglecting them. When Shiki asked what time lunch break was, he revealed that the other students were already on lunch break, which meant that he totally forgot about them. When Shiki arrived at the cafeteria to eat his lunch, he realized he didn't bring his chopsticks, so he went back inside the bus only to find Sayuri almost naked. He quickly turned around as his mind began to simulate every part of her body, after which he then apologized for walking into her, padding her plots while also promising to keep what happened a secret. He asked for permission to take his chopsticks, but she didn't say anything, so he wanted to leave only for her to grab him and forced him to have lunch with her in the bus. As they ate, the awkward silence made him struggle to eat, and after she took a large gulp of water, she turned to him and revealed she had an embarrassing condition that made her sweat a lot, which made her avoid physical activities until she eventually lost confidence in herself, so she ended up avoiding everyone. She said she wasn't padding to have bigger milkers but was actually drying off herself. He asked why she decided to tell him something so personal, so she explained that since he didn't have overly high expectations from her, it was easier to let him know. As they talked, her mood suddenly dampened when her phone rang, but Shiki told her to go about her business and assumed he wasn't there. She then took out a Nintendo Switch console and mentioned a popular game. However, his response made her shocked as he had no idea what she was talking about. She even gave him a game to play but ended up losing immediately, which was fun in its own way. She began tutoring him, regardless of how close they got. However, he was pretty uncomfortable with her plots all over him, so she withdrew herself thinking he was pissed at her for geeking out. She apologized, saying she wanted to be friends with people, but she had a bad habit of being clingy and creeped everyone out. As expected, he complimented her for trying her best with so much sincerity that she was actually moved. He even asked her to teach him how to game so that they could play together, and she accepted his offer while hiding her embarrassment. They immediately began their lesson in the bus, and with time, he managed to win a game, but she told him not to feel excited since it was the lowest level. They then recalled they were supposed to be skiing, so they went back to the course together. Since the teacher ditched them again, they decided to stick together as they headed up. She then asked why he was forcing himself to ski since the teacher didn't bother about them, but he said he felt like trying new things when he relocated to Hokkaido. He soon forgot himself and started talking about Fuyuki like a man in love, which was so obvious to Sayori, but she still asked if he liked her. However, he said they were just regular friends. She also revealed she usually ignored Fuyuki because it felt like she had an ulterior motive for trying to befriend her. Before they could talk more, they arrived at the skiing spot. He then made a bet with her, saying if he made it down the course without falling, she'd have to respond to Fuyuki. They then went down the course with Shiki giving her the pointers he got from the deadbeat teacher. Although he was able to stop by himself, Sayori was coming down faster than Truck-kun on a mission, and seeing that his instructions weren't getting to her, he braced himself to catch her only for Fuyuki to show beside her and taught her how to stop. Seeing the two together, Shiki left them alone, and Sayori took the cue, which allowed her the perfect opportunity to apologize to Sayori for being a snobbish bitch, so they eventually became friends. However, on their way home, Fuyuki was kinda jealous she was left out of the backseat coziness between Shiki and Sayori. The following day, Shiki was trapped at home since there was a blizzard and his body was sore from skiing. While he contemplated ditching school, Grandma said he must endure the Hokkaido blizzard to become a true citizen of the town. He then headed out, but the blizzard was worse than a protagonist training arc, so he screamed in pain. To make matters worse, he couldn't even see what was in front of him while his joints stiffened. He then thought about Fuyuki, who could probably overcome the blizzard, causing him to be more motivated. However, he was almost run over by a car as he fell down. He resigned himself to death as he saw Angel Fuyuki arrive to take his soul. However, it was actually Fuyuki who came down from the car. She took him inside the car, where he met another gyra that turned out to be Fuyuki's mom. However, she was so carefree and hot, he found it hard to believe she pooped some kids. As they drove, Fuyuki apologized for their small car and went all about how Shiki lived in a mansion. This made Fuyuki's mom try to hit on him as a joke, but Fuyuki wasn't having it. Shiki then complained that all his muscles were sore from skiing, but all she got from it was he was a rich, spoiled kid who'd break if she hit him too hard. Mai asked if he had a girlfriend, but he said he didn't have any, so she straight up asked what he thought about Fuyuki. Even though Fuyuki tried to stop the embarrassing conversation, she went on to add that Shiki looked like her husband, so he was making her heart race. Fuyuki had to threaten her with a death stare before she stopped teasing the poor guy. She then asked if it snowed in Tokyo so much, but Shiki said such a blizzard would have them declare a public holiday. He asked why people weren't outside since they were used to the weather, so the Garo duo had to explain that parents usually drop off their kids in school themselves, since buying a ton of winter outfits would freeze up their wallets before the cold got to them. Seeing how they talked like siblings, the Rizzler said they were cute unintentionally, and this got them tomato red in the face. They soon got to school, and before they came out, Mai promised to give him a ride during the next blizzard, so he thanked her for her kind gesture. They then hurried inside, but once they got to the hallway, Shiki was breathing like an overworked horse. They also noticed Sayori walking from behind, so Fuyuki went to hug her. However, she used the wall to support herself as she wallowed in pain. Shiki told her he was also suffering from muscle pain since they overdid the skiing exercise, so they began to bond over their pain, leaving Fuyuki out, causing her to interrupt them, saying they should include her in their sore muscles conversation. In class, Fuyuki noticed he now had his own blanket to cover up. Then she opened her jacket to reveal some warmers and asked if he also bought those. However, he was immediately distracted by her giant plots, so he had to look away before little Johnny woke up. She then lent him some of hers, leaving him to appreciate the decision to relocate from Tokyo, which made him being buddies with smoking hot baddies. As they conversed, she got excited when he used a local slang, which meant that he was adapting to life in Hokkaido. Just then, Sayuri showed up and said he shouldn't learn things from Fuyuki since everything, including her plots, were exaggerated. Fuyuki argued that she was a regular Hokkaido local, but Sayuri's argument was that she too was born and raised in the town, but she didn't have an accent or use their local slang. She said a lot of locals didn't do anything that made them stand out, which meant that Fuyuki was just built differently. Shiki soon noticed the console Sayuri was holding, so she told them she wanted him to play it he wanted to, and he replied that he'd love to do it with her, causing her dirty mind to race. He also asked if Fuyuki would love to learn from Sayuri, and of course she agreed since he'd be there. With that said, they planned a meeting and headed to a mall that had different sections. They then settled down in a corner where Shiki noticed the place wasn't crowded like the ones in Tokyo. They soon got engrossed in clearing different levels in the game, and when Shiki took a bathroom break, Fuyuki asked Sayuri to shop for some cosmetics together. She hesitated at first, but then she agreed to buy an expensive contact lens together since they were usually expensive. She then told Fuyuki she was a super nice girl in a very sus way that got her blushing, but Shiki arrived, so they stopped talking. He then became their chaperone as they shopped around, and after a while, it was time to go home. However, Fuyuki suggested they take a picture in the photo booth, which they did. While doing his homework at night, he picked his phone to confirm if the assignment was due the following day. He also admired the picture they took that afternoon, and she soon replied saying she was taking a bath, and then she proceeded to send a picture of her lower bits, sent another pic of her upper bits this time, causing him to lose concentration totally. She was hoping for a flirty response from him, but dude straight up complimented her dedication to her beauty routine with no words about her body. It was so disappointing that she called him, and when he answered, he realized it was a video call of her in the bath, which had him stuttering like an invalid. She was then satisfied with his virgin reaction. However, he had to drop the phone before he saw the eighth wonder of the world. He soon remembered he was to ask her about the assignment, but it turned out she totally forgot all about it, causing her to hurriedly stand up, which made her phone slip to reveal every inch of her plot. She managed to catch the phone while Shiki also struggled with his, and when he asked what happened, she asked if he saw anything, to which he responded that he also dropped his phone. Since he didn't see shit, he wondered why she suddenly wanted to hang up, but Fuyuki was so flustered as she thought she overdid it. The following day, the teacher scolded her in front of the class for not doing her homework. A few days later, they went to a karaoke spot where Fuyuki brought out Inner Beyonce. However, the lyrics felt like it was directed at Shiki. Everyone cheered for her fantastic performance, and even some other classmates who were around praised her. When Sayuri asked if Shiki loved karaoke, he couldn't say since he'd only gone a few times with family. He then asked about her, and she embarrassingly revealed that she usually went solo, so he tried not to make her feel bad since that was the worst thing possible for a teenager to do. However, his kind words only made things worse. Some guys then interrupted them asking for song recommendations, and even Fuyuki joined them. She offered to pick out songs for everyone interested, but ended up dragging only Sayuri and Shiki away. Later on, the guys talked about how their final exams were going to be difficult since they had to cover the huge syllabus alongside the long list of anime airing. The guys then suggested they hold a study group together, and just then, Fuyuki interrupted them, drawing their attention to Valentine's Day that was fast approaching. The guys said they had no interest in receiving chocolates. However, when the girls said they'd give them if they wanted, they all turned on simp mode. As Shiki wondered who Fuyuki would give chocolate to, Matsu asked her to get him a gift, and she gladly agreed. She then revealed she planned to make more than the 60 chocolates she gave out last year, which meant she was probably for the street.
What did he say?
When they asked if Sayuri would make chocolate, she said she'd rather save to get a PS5 console. The guys then asked if Shiki was expecting gifts from his Tokyo friends, but he said he could only bank on his grandma, a concept they could totally relate to. After the hangout, Shiki was left with Fuyuki and Sayuri, who both wanted to know if he had a good time, and when he said he did, Fuyuki promised to always invite him. It was now time for Sayuri to speak, but she told them not to mind her. As they walked home, she lagged behind to check out some Valentine's Day quotes. That weekend, she spent her time gaming instead of shopping. However, she soon found herself sneaking around the mall. Fuyuki coincidentally stumbled on her since she came to shop for ingredients to make chocolates, but Sayuri lied that she came to buy nail polish. However, she was caught lying since her nails were just done, so she had to force herself to buy cosmetics, knowing full well that Fuyuki would love such kind of things. After shopping, Fuyuki asked what kind of chocolate she'd like, and she said she liked the ones with fruity flavors, which got Fuyuki drooling for some. Later in class, Shiki noticed Fuyuki wasn't her usual cheerful self, and since there weren't any club activities, they were both left on cleaning duties. When he thanked her for the chocolates, she started sobbing, so he asked her what happened. Sayuri also hid as Fuyuki explained how her efforts were ruined because she said something she wasn't supposed to. Seeing her depressed touched him so much that he brought out his inner Mozart and played a piece in hopes of making her feel better. Since it happened to be the song she sang at karaoke, he succeeded in cheering her up so much that she burst out laughing at how innocent he was. Sayuri also showed up saying she had a pack of chocolate to give out. When Fuyuki tried to make herself scarce, she handed it to her, shocking Shiki also. Fuyuki then hugged her with passion, leaving Shiki embarrassed with his crumbled hopes and dreams that he dug a mental grave to bury his self-esteem. Fortunately, there was one for him too. Although it was obvious he wasn't her first priority, but the three friends managed to share a happy moment of love. The next day in class, it was announced that their final exam would begin the following week, so they were advised to study hard so they don't flunk a grade. Just the thought of studying for the exams made Fuyuki miserable, but Shiki on the other hand was actually glad, which made her ask if he was a nerd. Shiki sadly admitted that he was in fact a bookworm before going on to apologize for letting her down. However, she stopped him and said she was actually into nerds and their intelligent riz. She followed up by asking him if he was free, and when he said he was, she invited him for a study session. They also invited Sayuri as a third wheel, but Fuyuki's attitude made her question if it was actually a group reading or another excuse to goof around. Later in the day at her place, they noticed Fuyuki's house was empty with no sight of her parents or younger sister, who hadn't returned from dance classes. As Shiki and Sayuri went up to the room, Sayuri was happy to be visiting a girl's house for the first time, but Shiki was unmoved since he had been there several times. On hearing this, she stared at him like he was the poster man of the next generation stalkers. When they finally entered the room, they froze up at the sight of the glamorous pink obsessed decor. The atmosphere of the room was affecting Shiki in a different way, which had him trying hard to restrain his virgin thoughts. He quickly coordinated himself when he noticed Sayuri could see through him like glass. Just then, Fuyuki showed up with a particular drink which Shiki confessed he'd never seen in his entire life. She wanted to know his opinion, and when he tasted it, he said it was nice. After settling down, they started asking each other practice questions, with Shiki going first. Next, it was Sayuri's turn, and she took some time before getting the answer. When it was Sayuri's turn to ask questions, Shiki answered correctly almost immediately, while Fuyuki just sat like she was a dumb spectator. After studying for a while, he realized it was already way past his curfew, so he hurried home like his life depended on it, which got him bumping into Maya's airbags on his way out. She then offered to drive him home, seeing that he was in a hurry, and as they drove home, she made small talk like thanking him for helping Fuyuki overcome the depression of her chocolate cookie saga. Once she dropped him off, she handed him a gift which was pretty sus, but the idiot accepted it. Immediately he turned around. He met the cold, angry aura of his grandma, who didn't bother to hide her rage. When morning came, Shiki looked like he'd lost a few pounds, as he couldn't sleep well the previous night after being scolded by the old hag for missing curfew and hanging out with his friend's mom, which had her threatening to throw him out of the house if he broke her rule again. On his way to school, all the sadness he woke up with vanished like a dad on milk duties when he saw an angel in front of him. He was stunned by her aura, but more stunned by the fact that she was staring at dirt. Just then, she chased away some crows with a stick, which was suddenly the most cinematic thing he'd ever seen. Once in school, he described the angel he saw to Fuyuki, who easily identified her as Reina, their senior. She went on about how Reina was the school idol that everyone adored, and her fangirling went on for a while till she finally calmed down and asked Shiki for another study session. He had to decline her offer by making a stupid excuse, and Fuyuki noticed something was off, so she opted to study with Sayuri instead. Sayuri quickly turned her down since they ended up talking all through the night immediately after Shiki left the previous night. While the girls ate lunch together, Shiki was studying in the library only to be disturbed by Reina, who was snoring like an overweight elephant. He soon found himself watching her, and of course we can't blame him. But then she woke up while mumbling something about Hitler. This freaked him out, so he focused on his business like nothing happened, only for her to show up in front of him claiming she was the president of the library, so she had the right to sleep whenever she liked. She suddenly started running her hands around him like she was sampling him, and when she noticed he was solving math, she corrected his answers before walking away. That evening at home, his grandma told him it was time to hold the special tea ceremony to strengthen his mind since he'd been simping too much. She instructed him to clear his mind off distractions, including his unholy degenerate thoughts to enable him focus. Before they could begin, they were distracted by the doorbell, so she asked him to check who was outside. He went to open the door only to find Reina, who said she just wanted to deliver the neighborhood bulletin. She suddenly hugged him excitedly, and even his grandma walked into Reina petting him like a kitten. When the old crone shouted, Reina explained that Shiki caught her when she slipped before leaving. Shockingly, the old woman complimented Reina's look, which had Shiki spacing out like an actual simp. She finally gave up on him and said there was no need for the tea ceremony with baddies like that all around him. She, however, warned him to move into the top 10 students in his school, or she'd send him back to Tokyo. The following day, as Shiki walked to school, he kept replaying his grandmother's threat in his head and tried to think of a way to make it to the top 10. He accepted the fact that he'd been distracted by a lot of things lately, which was a result of being a simp for the super hot baddies in his life. However, he also knew if he didn't sit up and pass the exams, he'd never get to see them again, so he made up his mind to do so. Just then, Reina approached him, completely taking him by surprise. When she noticed his sad look, she asked if he'd gotten in trouble with his grandmother because of her unexpected hug the previous day. Shiki quickly shook his head, saying that her hug had nothing to do with his problem. He explained that he was having trouble with studying and needed to find a way to pass the upcoming exams. As they began walking to school, Reina apologized for her unexpected hug. She explained that she loved all things historical and that seeing anyone in traditional Japanese clothing always made her lose a few brain cells. This made Shiki realize that all he needed to do to get her floodgates to open was to dress up in traditional clothes. He thought it was an unusual fetish, but he also wasn't going to complain because it was his ticket to Pound Town. Reina then offered to tutor him as a way to apologize for inconveniencing him the previous day. Shiki tried to refuse and said the problem he was having had more to do with his ranking than it did with his studying. This made Reina ask if he was rejecting her help because he believed she had low ranks and was dumber than a horse. Shiki assured her that it wasn't the case, so Reina smiled and said he didn't have to worry as she had always placed first since she enrolled. Hearing this made Shiki see her in a new light as he couldn't believe Shiki had been blessed with both beauty and brains. He thought back to how she helped him solve the math question the previous day in the library and made up his mind to accept her offer. He was determined to raise his ranks no matter what so he could remain in Hokkaido and spend more time with his friends. He told Reina that he was willing to learn from her, so she asked him to meet her in the library's storage room every day after classes. Since he knew they would be alone in the room, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd be able to concentrate on anything other than Reina during their study session. When they arrived at school, Erika spotted them and pointed them out to Fuyuki, who decided to go say hello. However, she stopped dead in her tracks when she realized Shiki was speaking to Reina. After Reina walked away, Fuyuki approached Shiki and asked how he became friends with Reina. She didn't even let him answer and began fangirling about how beautiful Reina looked up close. Shiki just watched her as he remembered she told him before that she idolized Reina. As they walked to class, he explained that Reina was his neighbor and said they had bumped into each other on the way to school. Later on in class, Fuyuki asked Shiki if he wanted to study with her, and he told her that he couldn't. She accepted his answer with a smile on her face, but Shiki couldn't help but feel bad for turning her down. His grandmother's threat was still fresh in his mind, and he knew that if he were to tell Fuyuki about it, she'd blame herself for distracting him. After classes later on, Shiki went to the storage room just like Rina told him to. Before she granted him access to the room, she asked for the password, which he gave. Saying the password made him feel like he was Alibaba about to enter a cave full of treasures. Once he stepped into the room, Rina welcomed him, after which they began studying the subjects he had issues with. During the study session, Rina asked who his math teacher was, and he told her. She even told him that the man was known to use the same questions he used during class quizzes for the final exams and advised him to review the questions. A few hours later, Shiki and Rina packed up their things, and just before they left the room, Shiki thanked Rina for tutoring him. She told him it was her pleasure and asked why he was determined to raise his ranks. Shiki explained that if he didn't, he would never get to see the people who were very dear to him again. This made Rina say she wanted a reward from him in return for helping him study, and that reward would be a date with him if he managed to reach the rank he hoped for. A few days later, the exams began, and everyone, including the pea-brained Fuyuki, was happy to get it over and done with. A week after the exams, the results were released, and while Fuyuki complained to Sayori about her low rank, Shiki went to find Rina. He told her he placed third, and thanked her for everything she did to help him. He even asked if her rank had been affected because of it, and she told him that she retained her #1 spot since she was the next Rick Sanchez. That weekend, he dressed up in his traditional attire and told his grandmother he was going out for tea with a friend. The old woman didn't try to stop him as he'd achieved the goal she set for him by placing third in the exams. When he stepped out of the house, he was surprised to see Rina dressed in a beautiful pink kimono. As he stood there internally gauche about how cute she looked, Rina complimented his looks and promised to control her urge to throw herself on him. Soon after that, they began walking to the mall. Unknown to them, Mai, who was also on her way to the mall, saw them walking together and decided to inform Fuyuki about it. A few seconds later, a sleepy Fuyuki received Mai's text about Shiki's date. She wasted no time and called Sayori to meet her at the mall so they could spy on Shiki and his date. When Sayori got there and Fuyuki showed her the couple, she was surprised. But what surprised her the most was the fact that Fuyuki wasn't bothered by it. The feather-brained girl was more concerned with the fact that Rina was dressed in a kimono than the fact that she was on a date with Shiki. They then followed the pair until they stopped by some claw machines, where Rina pointed to a weird-looking bear that she wanted. Shiki thought she had weird tastes, but since she loved the bear, he offered to win it for her. After hearing this, Rina was ecstatic and cheered Shiki on as he did his best to win the bear. Unfortunately, it kept slipping out of the claw at the last minute, and Sayori, who deemed herself a claw machine pro, nearly lost her shit. Fuyuki had to stop her when she tried to stomp over and clobber Shiki in the head for messing up. Eventually, Shiki was able to win a smaller stuffed animal, and Rina promised to take care of it. The way she looked when she made the promise left Shiki speechless, and all he could do was stare at her like some idiot. Meanwhile, as Fuyuki watched them, she became all emotional and told Sayori that she admired Shiki. She also said a bunch of other sappy emotional stuff until she realized she sounded like she had a crush on Shiki. Thankfully, Sayori hadn't heard a word of what she'd said as she had been emptying the claw machine closest to them. Just then, they overheard Shiki tell Rina that they would be late for their movie, but before Sayori finished putting her winnings in a bag, they had already left. At the cinema, Rina and Shiki bought tickets, and when the movie began, Shiki noted that the main character in the movie was similar to Rina. When he looked in her direction to tell her that, he saw her crying. After the movie, they went to a cafe, and Rina apologized for her emotional moment during the movie. She explained that she had cried during the movie because she identified with the character. Just like her, the character always worked hard and did her best, but she rarely got praised for it. Shiki told her he understood how she felt because he'd been in a similar situation before. However, Rina pointed out that their situations were different because, unlike him, she was worried about how she was viewed by people. She was also worried that if she stopped trying and putting effort into the things she did, they would never appreciate her. Shiki told her not to feel that way, as there were a lot of people who saw and admired her for the things she did, but she found it hard to believe him. He had to use a scene from the movie they had watched to get his point across to her, and that was enough to make her feel better. As they continued talking, Rina admitted that she was happy she met him and shyly asked if he had a girlfriend. However, before he could respond, she answered the question by pointing out that he wouldn't be on a date with her if he had a girlfriend. Since her previous question wasn't so difficult to answer, she asked if he'd been lonely since he moved to Hokkaido. Shiki told her that he hadn't and talked about the friends he'd made in his short time there. He said his friends were very special and he was grateful to them because they accepted him even though he was a pathetic loser. While he was speaking, he had no idea Fuyuki and Sayuri were listening as they had snuck into the cafe when they spotted him. Rina was happy to hear that he had friends who took care of him, and he told her that she would love his friends if she met them. He then invited her to hang out with them, but before Rina could accept or refuse, Fuyuki cut her off. She happily announced that she was all in for a hangout with Rina, and Sayuri reminded her that they were supposed to be undercover. This made Shiki realize that his friends had been playing Sherlock and Watson the entire time he'd been on his date with Rina. He became embarrassed because he knew they had heard the things he said about them, but to his surprise, they didn't bring it up. Rina then asked who Fuyuki and Sayuri were, so Shiki introduced the girls as his classmates. Of course, Fuyuki had to forward and ask Rina for a handshake, stating that she was a fan, so Rina nervously shook her hand. This made Fuyuki so happy that she declared that she would never wash her hands again. Sayuri scolded her for saying that and pointed out that she was making Rina feel weird. Rina just laughed and said she understood why Shiki cared for them as they were a fun bunch. Just then, Mei called out to them and invited them to have some yakiniku with her, as she had received a bonus for selling more clothes that day. At the restaurant, Fuyuki announced that it was their post-exam party before she took a bite of the meat. As she chewed, she began talking about how delicious it was and how the meat melted on her tongue. This made Rina and Sayuri salivate, so they too picked up their chopsticks and took a bite of the meat, instantly turning into food critics themselves the moment they tasted it. Mei then encouraged Shiki to join them, and when he did, he felt like he was floating in meat heaven. He also couldn't help but wonder if this was how Luffy felt every time he ate meat. As their lunch continued, Rina somehow ended up as the topic of their conversation. Fuyuki proudly stated that Rina was at the top of her class, which made Sayuri compliment her for being blessed with beauty and brains. Fuyuki then explained that Rina was the top student in her class because she worked hard to get where she was. She even admitted that every time she saw Rina, she wished she could be like her. Rina was surprised by Fuyuki's admission as it made her remember what Shiki had told her before, and that made her happy. Later on, as they made their way home, Fuyuki pulled Shiki aside and asked if he was Rina's boyfriend. Shiki panicked and reminded her that he was far from boyfriend material, so she asked why he'd gone on a date with Rina. He told her that there were various reasons why he did, so she stopped bugging him for an answer. However, she got closer to him and whispered in his ear, saying that he had to take her out on a date too. She even told him that they could spend the night together after their date, and that made him panic. Fuyuki just laughed and told him to keep his sausage tightly locked up in his pants, as she was only joking about making plot with him. However, she was serious about him taking her on a date that spring, and as she walked away, he couldn't help but wonder what spring in Hokkaido would be like. A few days later, Matsuo stopped Shiki on his way to class and asked him for his opinion on how to apologize to Sayuri and Fuyuki. He explained that he hadn't spoken to either one of the girls since the Valentine's Day debacle and he felt bad about it. Shiki suggested that he buy them gifts for White Day and then take the chance to apologize to them. He also told him that he was sure Fuyuki wasn't upset with him and assured him that Sayuri would forgive once she saw him apologizing to Fuyuki. Matsuo thanked Shiki for his advice, then ran off to make preparations. Later that day, after Shiki got home from school, he asked his grandmother to help him make some rice crackers for White Day. The next day happened to be White Day, so Matsuo presented Fuyuki with a box of onion pie and an apology for what he said on Valentine's Day. Fuyuki, the foodie, happily took the box from him, saying she loved onion pie, and then told him that his apology had been accepted. The next moment, she heard movement from out the door. To her surprise, Shiki and Sayuri came forward, and while Shiki apologized for eavesdropping, Matsuo presented Sayuri with another pie box. She accepted the box and told him she'd forgiven him since he had apologized for being a major douchebag. Shiki then pulled out the rice crackers from his back, and after he shared it with them, Matsuo demanded to know what he wanted in return. Shiki assured him that he wanted nothing, but Matsuo promised to repay his kindness. Later that day, Matsuo sent Shiki a text inviting him to come smelt fishing with him that weekend. Since it was something he'd never done, he agreed to go with Matsuo and his father. On the proposed day, Shiki met up with Matsuo. As they walked to find a place to set up their equipment, they bumped into Fuyuki. Since her family had moved on from that spot, the boys invited her to join them, and she gladly accepted. Soon after that, they'd found a spot and Matsu drilled the holes in the ice, after which he showed them how to put bait on the fishing lines. However, he opted out of setting up a tent because it wasn't a windy day and the others didn't complain. Unfortunately, after sitting down for an hour, they were yet to make a catch, so Matsuo told them he was going to check in on his father. Once he was gone, Fuyuki pointed out to Shiki that it was the first time they were alone in a long time, which made him feel self-conscious. Fortunately, he didn't have anything to worry about as Fuyuki was more interested in watching makeup tutorials than teasing him. She moved her chair closer to him and began showing him the video she was watching. She said that she wanted to be as good as the girl one day, and Shiki told her that she was already good. Fuyuki thanked him for his compliment, but said she wanted to do her best to become better. She explained that she loved anything that had to do with beauty and makeup and hoped to one day study them abroad. Shiki was impressed by her dreams and encouraged her to keep doing her best to achieve them. As he spoke, she moved closer to him and asked if he'd used any moisturizer on his skin before leaving home. Shiki told her no, so she scolded him for not taking care of his skin and offered to put some lip balm on his lips to keep them from cracking. As soon as she pulled out her lip balm, Shiki started freaking out because to him using her lip balm was the same as kissing her. Just before she could put it on him, Matsuo returned and told them he found a new spot, which made Shiki happy. At their new spot, they caught a lot of fish, which they fried up and ate together with the rice balls Matsuo's mom made for him. That day ended up being one of the happiest days in Shiki's life, but it also led to him being sick with a cold. As he lay in bed, he received a text from Sayuri, who sympathized with him for being sick and advised him to get some rest. Just then, his grandmother came in with some rice porridge for him and a bottle of water she said Rina had dropped off when she found out he was sick. He thanked her for the food, and after reading the note Rina put on the bottle, he smiled. His grandmother then told him that she had some errands she needed to run. He told her not to worry about him and assured her that he would be fine while she was out. After she left, he drank some water and ate some of the food she had brought before lying back down. Unfortunately, his fever refused to go down, and aside from making him feel like it also made him feel lonely. Eventually, he drifted off to sleep, wishing he had someone by his side, and since the plot gods loved him so much, they granted his wish. When next he opened his eyes, Fuyuki was there, and she told him that she'd run into his grandmother. It so happened that the woman had been worried since he was home alone and asked Fuyuki to watch over him. Having Fuyuki in his room made Shiki freak up, and things only got worse when she leaned in to check his temperature with her forehead. Oblivious to the fact that her presence was the reason his face was red and his body was hotter, Fuyuki offered him some mint candy to help with his sore throat. After he took it, she apologized for getting him sick and said if she hadn't insisted that he kept fishing, he wouldn't be confined to a bed. Shiki told her it wasn't her fault, but she refused to accept that and even promised to do anything he wanted. That statement would have made a healthy Shiki start imagining all kinds of things, but since he was sick, he just felt dizzy. Fuyuki noticed this and made him lay down on his futon. As she fussed over him, he weakly asked her to remain by his side. His request was surprising, but she held his hand and promised to grant his wish. The next day, he was feeling much better, so he sent Fuyuki a text, thanking her for taking care of him. He also asked if they had spoken about anything important, and she told him no. However, he couldn't help but feel like she wasn't telling the truth since he could still feel the warmth her hands gave him as she held it. Meanwhile, Fuyuki lay in bed looking at her hands and told herself that it would have been nice if they had stayed that way. A few weeks later, it was spring and the beginning of a new term, and as Shiki made his way to school, he met Fuyuki. When she saw him, she grabbed his arm and told him she'd been waiting for him, so he apologized for being late. As they walked, Shiki pointed out that since it was a new term, there was a possibility they wouldn't be in the same class. The moment he said this, Fuyuki went quiet, but before he could ask questions, she spoke up. She told him that she'd heard a rumor that the school assigned classes according to grades, and since her grades were very bad, she had a feeling they wouldn't be in the same class. She said if they weren't in the same class, They wouldn't be able to hang out together as much as they did before, as they would have to make new friends. That was why she had wanted to walk to school with him, so she could spend some time with him before school. Seeing how sad she was, Shiki promised to go visit her if they ended up in separate classes. However, he felt a bit embarrassed, saying that, so he started stuttering like a fool, which made Fuyuki laugh. Later on, when they got to school, they joined the other students at the notice boards to find out what class they had been out in. It didn't take long for them to spot their names, and by some miracle, they were in the same class. Fuyuki was so relieved, and while she was celebrating, Sayuri walked over to them. She too had been put in the same class as them, and Fuyuki expressed her joy at having her friend with her. While the girls chatted, Shiki spotted Rina standing not too far away and gave her a subtle nod. Just as he turned his attention to the girls, an excited Matsuo rushed over to them and told them that he was also in their class. He then suggested they go in the building as classes were about to start. In the classroom later on, their new homeroom teacher introduced herself to them, after which she said they needed to elect the class representatives. Matsuo was quick to nominate Shiki for the position of class president, stating that he was the right man for the job. Shiki pointed out that he'd only been at the school for half a year, but Matsuo assured him that he was the right man for the job. Fuyuki and Sayuri even backed him up, so Shiki agreed to take the position. When it was time to select the vice president, Fuyuki volunteered to take the position. A few days later, Shiki and Fuyuki stayed behind after school to sort out some forms. When they were done, Shiki noticed it was starting to get late, and when he pointed it out, Fuyuki told him staying late at school was fun. Shiki said he didn't like being in school once it got dark, so she began to tease him about being scared of ghosts. He had to explain that what he hated was how lonely he felt being in school at that hour. However, Fuyuki told him that being alone with him in school made her feel like they were the only ones left in the world. After she said this, he began to feel awkward, so she thanked her for volunteering to be his vice president. Fuyuki admitted that the only reason she volunteered was because she wanted to spend more time with him, which shocked him. He tried to play it off by telling her not to tease him, but she moved closer to him and told him she wasn't teasing him. As they stared at one another, their teacher came into the room, and after she gathered the papers, she thanked them for helping out. As they began making their way home, Shiki noticed that Fuyuki was quiet and not contributing to anything he said. Suddenly, she spoke up and asked him to keep one day free for her during the Golden Week because she had something important to tell him. Soon after she said this, she said goodnight to him and walked away, leaving him to wonder what had gotten into her. Eventually, Golden Week rolled around, and on the first day, Shiki waited outside the train station for Fuyuki to arrive. He'd arrived early because he hadn't been able to sleep a wink the entire night, as his mind kept wondering why Fuyuki wanted to spend an entire day with him. As he waited, he couldn't help but think she wanted to confess to him. However, he quickly shook his head to get rid of those thoughts because there was no way in hell she'd want anything to do with a shriveled-looking rat like him. A few minutes later, Fuyuki arrived and apologized for making him come out so early in the morning, but he assured her that it wasn't a problem. He then asked where they were going and how long it would take for them to get there. Fuyuki said it was a surprise, but let him know that the trip would take 3 hours. The surprised look he wore on his face made her assure him that he wouldn't notice the time because they would be busy chatting. A little while after their train left the station, Shiki noticed some horses grazing in the field and pointed them out to Fuyuki. However, she didn't respond, so he looked in her direction and discovered she was fast asleep. As he watched her, he recalled that she'd also fallen asleep the day they watched a movie together. This memory made him wonder what his life in Hokkaido would have been like if he'd never befriended the crazy girl before him. While his mind wandered, he turned to look at the sleeping beauty before him. The next moment, she opened her eyes, an action that he found irresistible. So without thinking, he blurted out that she was pretty. As soon as the words left his mouth, he realized his mistake and tried to explain that he wasn't watching her like some creep. Unfortunately, his brain had disconnected from his mouth, and he ended up saying a boatload of rubbish. Thankfully, Fuyuki found it adorable and bumped her fist against his shoulder in a teasing manner. Shortly after, they arrived at their destination, but Fuyuki informed Shiki that they still needed to catch the bus to get to the place she wished to show him. To get to the cafe, they rented some bikes, and as they rode, Shiki couldn't help but admire Fuyuki. At the cafe, they ordered taiyaki, and after taking the first bite, Shiki commented on how good it was. When he continued eating, he he noticed Fuyuki was staring at him, so he asked if he had something on his face. While smiling mischievously, she explained that she always felt happy watching him eat because he always looked so happy whenever he ate. Her admission made Shiki blush, so he covered his mouth and turned away from her. Fuyuki tried to get him to stop, but all he could think about was how much she'd been teasing him. Hoping to turn the table, he told her that she also made food look delicious whenever she ate. His statement caught her off guard. She recovered quickly and offered him a bite from her taiyaki, which he happily took. After their meal, they went to the gift shop, and while looking through the items on display, Fuyuki asked Shiki for his opinion on some hairpins. He pointed to the pink one, saying it suited her style. Soon after she left, Shiki noticed a bracelet lying on the table and kept staring at it. Later on, they got on the bus, which took them to the place Fuyuki wanted to show Shiki. During the ride, Shiki slept like a baby and Fuyuki smiled at how adorable he looked with his head hanging. When they finally arrived, she covered his eyes and led him to the place, and when she was sure he was ready for the surprise, she took her hands away. Shiki was stunned into silence as he took in the magnificent view of the cherry blossom fields surrounding them. Overwhelmed, his eyes began to water. But because he wanted to maintain his reputation as a hardcore guy, he quickly wiped his face. He then thanked Fuyuki for bringing him to a place as wonderful and spectacular as the Cherry Blossom Park. This made her smile, and she offered him her hand so they could explore the park like they were Dora and Boots. As Shiki reached out to take her hand, he couldn't help but wonder why she'd set up such an incredible surprise for him. However, he didn't try asking any questions because she looked so happy, and he didn't want to ruin the moment. The first thing they did was take pictures of the park from a higher level, after which Fuyuki asked a nice old couple to help take pictures of them, and when they were done, she suggested that they pay their respects at the shrine there. Meanwhile, back at home, Rina went to Shiki's house to drop off the neighborhood bulletin. When she knocked on the door, the person who answered was Shiki's father, and he let her know that Shiki wasn't home when she asked about him. Back in the park, Fuyuki had fun driving go-karts, eating snacks, dipping their legs in a pool, watching a live band perform, and a bunch of other stuff people did while on a date. After all of that, they wrapped up the day with some ice cream while they watched the sunset. As they stood together, he took a picture of her, and she asked if he could send it to her, so he pulled up her contact. Right before he sent the picture, he noticed that she'd changed her profile picture to the one they took together in front of the shrine. This made him ask if she wasn't worried that people would assume they were a couple, but Fuyuki didn't respond. She just kept staring at him, which made him feel awkward, so he pulled out a pouch from his pocket and handed it to her. Fuyuki opened it excitedly and found the bracelet he'd been staring at earlier. He admitted he'd bought it because he thought it would look good on her, and then helped her put it on. Once he was done, Fuyuki dropped a bomb on him by saying she was traveling abroad to study. Shocked by her words, all he could do was stare at her, so she took the chance to continue speaking. She told him she wanted to learn more about makeup and beauty, and to do so she needed to challenge herself. She thanked him for motivating her to become a better version of herself because before he came into her life, she was nothing but a lazy ass bum. She also admitted that she was glad she could spend some time with him before leaving, and just as she was about to ask if he had fun, he hugged her. The hug was so sudden that it left her speechless, and when they finally separated, Fuyuki noticed Shiki was on the verge of tears. Unfortunately, their heartfelt moment was cut short by a staff of the park who informed them that the park was closing. His sudden arrival startled both of them, and it took them a while to gather their bearings. Fuyuki told Shiki it was best they make their way to the bus station, else they would miss the last bus out. The staff overheard them and told them that the last bus had already left, which surprised them. He then explained that during the holidays and weekends, the number of bus trips and their departure times were different. Having no other choice, Fuyuki made a call to his father and asked if he could drive down to pick them up. His father said he couldn't come and told him to go spend the night at the hotel his friend owned. Shiki was mortified by his father's decision, and when he informed Fuyuki, she was so shocked that she couldn't speak. Later on, as they sat in their hotel room, Shiki wondered if his father had asked him to spend the night because he assumed his friend was a guy. As he stood like a forgotten piece of trash trying to figure out what to do with their current situation, Fuyuki spoke up. She reminded him of the time they ate yakiniku and how she'd suggested they have a sleepover. This made the alarm bells in his head go off, so to distract himself, he asked if her parents were okay with her not coming home. Fuyuki told him she called her mother to let her know that she was spending the night out. They then went to have dinner, and on their way back, Fuyuki asked Shiki if she could shower first. Her question freaked him out so much that even after they got to the room and she went to take a shower, he kept thinking things over in his head. The gentleman in him was the only reason he didn't give in to the urge to become a shameless peeping Tom. However, it wasn't enough to stop him from visualizing an almost make-out session with Fuyuki, who by the way was only dressed in a towel. Thankfully, he was able to get rid of his cultured desires and reminded himself that he was overreacting. He also recalled something similar had happened when Fuyuki fell asleep a few months ago. He then scolded himself for even deluding himself into believing that someone like Fuyuki would be interested in finding out if his driller could function for more than a minute. To distract himself, he turned on the television and watched an ad for the part play on the screen. By the time Fuyuki came out of the bathroom, he was fast asleep, so she knelt by his bed and watched him until she got tired. Later that night, she snuck out of the room with all her belongings but left behind a note for Shiki. A few days later, Sayuri was sitting in a cafe when Asuka and Hina approached her. After they sat down at her table and ordered food, Asuka invited Sayuri to join them at a karaoke bar later on, but she turned down her offer, hoping to get her to change her mind about hanging out with them. Asuka suggested that they go to the movies instead, but just like before, Sayuri said no. This made Asuka tell her that if all she did was play video games, she would never get a boyfriend. Hina then asked Sayuri if she had someone she was crushing on, and the Raven wannabe told her no even though she was blushing hard. Asuka was quick to notice this, so she began teasing Sayuri and bugging her to let the cat out of the bag. Sayuri refused and told Asuka to stop being a nosy bit, but that just made Asuka laugh. Hina tried to make Asuka stop her teasing, but got distracted when Fuyuki and Mai walked into the cafe. What even drew her attention the most was the bright pink suitcase Fuyuki had with her. Sayuri then approached Fuyuki, and as they sat in another booth, Fuyuki informed her that she was going abroad to study. She thanked Sayuri for the advice she'd given her a while back and said it was one of the reasons she was taking the bold step to go abroad to study makeup. Seeing the determination and joy on her face made Sayuri smile and wish her luck. The next moment, Fuyuki received a message from her mother saying they had to leave, so she bid Sayuri farewell and went to meet her mother. After they drove off, Sayuri sent a quick text to Shiki, informing him that Fuyuki was on her way to the airport. After Shiki read Sayuri's text, he got out of bed so he could pick up the note Fuyuki had left for him in the hotel room. Reading the note again left him torn between his desire to see her one last time and the desire to shield himself from the pain of never seeing her again. While he battled with himself, he slammed his hand on his table, causing his bag to open and Fuyuki's hairpin to fall out of it. He was surprised to see the hairpin and told himself that he had to return it to her before she left. He knew it was a lame excuse, but it was the only one he had, and he was willing to make use of it. Immediately, he rushed to his father's room and almost caused the man to choke on the mochi he was eating. After apologizing, he begged him to take him to the airport, but his father said he couldn't as he had an online meeting to attend. However, Shiki insisted that it was a matter of life or death, so his father made a call and canceled the meeting. He then told Shiki to go get dressed so they could be on their way, and Shiki thanked him. At the airport, Fuyuki kept looking at her phone, hoping that Shiki would either give her a call or text her. She was so focused on her phone that she didn't hear any of the things her mother said. Soon after, they were asked to head to their gate as their flight was about to begin boarding. Mai told Fuyuki to go ahead as she needed to use the bathroom and then left. After one final glance at her phone, Fuyuki got up and began walking towards the boarding gate. Before she could make it to the gate, Shiki grabbed her arm so she turned around to face him. At that moment, Mai was on her way back from the bathroom, and when she saw the two of them staring at one another, she decided not to interrupt because the entire scene was like something out of a cliché romance movie. Once Fuyuki overcame the initial shock of seeing Shiki, she asked why he had come. He placed her hairpin in her hand and said he found it inside his bag. Fuyuki acted surprised even though she purposely put it in his bag in the hopes that he'd try to return it. After she thanked him for returning it, he admitted that he had come because he wanted to see her. He then began his sappy story about how his life in Hokkaido would have been if he'd never met her. Eventually, he rounded up his speech by saying that no matter how long it took for her to return, he would wait. To his surprise, Fuyuki told him the course she was taking was for only 2 weeks. This left him feeling like a fool, but in her usual crazy fashion, Fuyuki managed to make that feeling go away. She admitted she was scared of traveling and starting at a new school, but promised to be as brave as he was when he transferred to their school. She also assured him that she would ace her classes and be back before he knew it. A few weeks later, just like she promised, Fuyuki returned to Japan and made a grand entry into class during homeroom. All their classmates were happy to see her, and after she took her seat, Shiki handed her a bag of her favorite chicken. She thanked him for the gift and then began happily munching on it before she offered one to him. Forgetting that they were in class, Shiki leaned over and ate the chicken she offered him. This made the teacher scold them for being inappropriate in class, after which she told them to see her after school. Shiki felt embarrassed, but he smiled happily at Fuyuki, who returned his smile. If you've watched up to this point, let's confuse the fake fans by commenting Senpai. If you like recaps like this, check out this video over here.